Good morning.
Good morning.
A physician by the name of Robert Anderson, who has researched the subject of stress extensively, says that he used to think that 35 to 40% of the problems he saw in his office were stress-induced. Now he thinks it could be as high as 90%. These problems include stomach disorders, headaches, high blood pressure, insomnia, back pain, muscle aches, as well as a host of psychiatric disorders. The late Dr. John Schindler wrote that of 500 people admitted to a clinic, 77% were suffering emotionally from what he called the C.D.Ts, by which he meant the cares, the difficulties, and troubles of life. Do you have C.D.Ts? If you don't, you haven't been paying attention. A lot of us do. It reminds me of an experience of the explorer Fernando Magellan. The date was 500 years ago. For about a year, Magellan had battled foul weather and mutinous crews as he sought to find a passage through South America. When he finally found his way from the raging seas of the Atlantic to the great body of water that lay beyond this continent, he named it Pacific, or peaceful. And he and his men lifted their heads and gave thanks to God. That is what many of us would like to find. We would like to put down our anchor in a great sea called Pacific. Peaceful. The gospel tells us, "Peace I leave with you," said Jesus. "My peace I give unto you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." You know, Jesus was preparing his disciples for rough times. They would be on their own, but not really on their own. God would be with them in the presence of a comforter, a counselor, the Holy Spirit. So even though they would be sailing through stormy seas, underneath would be a sea of peace. His promise is to us as well. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Hugh Missildine said that fear is one of the earliest emotions a baby experiences, and that all fears tend to be variations of three basic ones: the fear of falling, the fear of loud noises, and the fear of being abandoned. Most of us learn to deal with the first two. So as we get older, that first fear returns, the fear of falling. Some of us have problems with heights. The fear of falling is still with us, but for the most part not debilitating. As we get older, we may not fear loud noises like we did as an infant, but they may bother us just the same. Now, the fear of abandonment, that is a subtle fear of which we may not even be aware, but which may get even more acute as the years pass. It is no fun at all, and we're particularly aware of that now for our dear ones who are in care facilities and who are isolated from family and friends. But Jesus says to us, "I will never leave you alone." In a large metropolitan hospital, there was a constant problem with noise in the infant nursery. Crying babies would disturb one another. The sound level was almost unbearable for the staff as well as for the newborns. They tried separating the babies, soundproofing the walls. This helped the staff, but it didn't seem to help the infants. Then someone had the idea of playing a recording of a mother's heartbeat beside each bed. It worked. The sound that the babies heard even before they were born was the sound that comforted them the most. The Holy Spirit is God's heartbeat in our lives, the assurance that we are not alone. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Some of us are afraid. For some, fear is linked to guilt. Norman Vincent Peale told us spending some time on a tropical island. In the hotel, there was a map that hung in one of the hallways. In the corner of the map, there was some very faint lettering over an almost totally uninhabited part of the island. Looking closely, Dr. Peale realized the words were, "The land of look behind." He asked the owner of the hotel what those words meant. The owner said that in the days of slavery, runaways from the sugar plantations sometimes escaped into that lonely and barren territory. They were often pursued. The fugitives were always on the run, always looking behind their shoulders. So that's where the term came from, the land of look behind. What a terrible place to live. A land where you are always looking back over your shoulder in fear. Some people do live there, though. What a terrible place to live. During Billy Graham's London crusade many years ago, a psychiatrist told him that, in his opinion, 70% of those in mental institutions could be dismissed immediately if they could find release from their tormenting guilt. Let not your hearts be troubled. Some of us need to move from the land of look behind to the land of beginning again. Christ can do that for us, can help us make that kind of transition. His love, His forgiveness, His grace is sufficient. Some of us are afraid of what lies ahead. Jesus said, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself." You know, we are told that the cables that were built to support the weight of the Oakland Bay Bridge were fashioned with a capacity of bearing a load 2.5 times greater than the maximum they would ever be called upon to bear. Now, I don't know how heavy a load we are capable of bearing. The Scriptures testify, though, that by the power of the Holy Spirit, we can endure any trial. We can overcome any temptation. We can bear up under any circumstance. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. May you be blessed by a simple witness in His name. Amen.